How do we feel about cover letters? Do we care about them anymore?
I don't, and I asked my team too because I feel like I was worried I might be an outlier on that, and they said they really don't either. I know I've noticed sometimes people will ask for one, so of course if they ask for one, and if you've applied, that to me shows that you're interested. I don't necessarily need to read a paragraph about why.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents on cover letters. I think they're kind of a waste of time and don't think they do much for the process.
Okay. Okay. Oh, welcome to Control Your Career, a podcast to help you conquer uncertainty, shatter imposter syndrome, and rise above the expectations imposed by others. My name is Julia Toothacre, and I am the career coach and strategist at Ride the Tide Collective, my career development company, where I offer career coaching courses and I have a plethora of free content. I have been doing this work for well over a decade. And I want to help empower professionals like you find clarity, navigate your career with intention, and help you advance in your career in alignment with your unique personality, preferences, and values. This podcast is a great place to start your journey toward controlling your career. I'm bringing back the ever popular Recruiter's Perspective theme for season 11 with a new group of recruiters and talent acquisition professionals to help you understand the hiring process from their lens. We'll be digging into resume and interview tips, talking about how the ATS works, looking at the history of the job market, and we'll be tackling hot button topics in recruiting and hiring. This is going to be a season full of great advice, tips, and uncovering the truth about the hiring process from those who are on the front lines of hiring. Find this episode and more at ridethetidecollective.com and connect with me on LinkedIn, where I post career information and inspiration to help you control your career. Welcome, everyone. We are back with another episode on the Recruiter's Perspective theme, and I am very excited for our guests today as we are going to see a little bit more of a global perspective. Lara Nichols is our guest, and she is the Senior Managing Director of Global Talent Management at Markel Insurance. Lara, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you, Julia.
Same. We have some fun topics.
Mm.
So we're going to be talking about, kind of the job seeker experience across the world, I think, and looking at some of the differences there. But also, we're going to dig a little bit into what is happening in RTO and flex work and all the topics surrounding that. So I am very excited for that conversation. But I would love for you to introduce yourself and give the audience just a little bit of background about who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I love the topic of recruiting. I've been in the HR field for quite a long time now, but my initial foray into HR was recruiting. I started as a recruiter, so it's very close to my heart. But my roles evolved over time, and I've done many different things from running employee relations to implementing HR systems, and most recently moved over to Markel about 8.5 years ago. Started out as an HR business partner, and my role has changed over several years there as well. And I started running the recruiting team for the US and Bermuda in 2023. And then, as of August of last year, added a global piece to my role where I run recruiting globally, as well as our leadership development and talent development function and our talent cycles. So that all falls under the talent management umbrella. And that's what I
Oh my
do
gosh.
today.
Yeah, wow. So you see everything in terms of recruiting for Markel.
I do. I do. Yes.
That's awesome. I love that. I would love to know what are some of the main differences that you see in recruiting between what is happening in the US right now and what is happening globally?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's a lot of things that certainly are the same, and as the function is global from Markel, we definitely have the awareness that we have to think regionally as well, and what's important to candidates can change and can be different in different locations. So in the US, people might have a focus on certain things related to how they feel about working in the office or not. We certainly see a lot more remote working here in the
Mhm.
States than we do in our London office or in the UK, as an example.
Interesting.
People, I think, expect to work in an office there. However, especially if you work in a larger city like London, you might not want to go in as many days. So we
Mm.
even have a little bit of a different hybrid policy in place as it relates to that, because there's just differences in the different regions and the locations. But at the end of the day, it's insurance that we're recruiting for, and there's a lot of similarities as well.
Okay, okay. That's amazing. I love that. I love that perspective. What about the hiring cycle? I'm not quite sure. I know some industries have a hiring cycle, a time of year process they go through. What does that look like for insurance? And then again, looking globally, is it different
Right.
depending on where you are in the world?
One of the biggest differences that I've noticed is it can take longer in Europe to hire people because their notice
Mm.
periods are longer. So you really have to factor that in when you go to hire for a role. It's going to likely take longer to land someone. You might have an offer accepted pretty quickly, but it might be 6 months before they're allowed to even start. There are no 2 week
Oh,
notices over there, so it's
oh,
very different. Yeah,
interesting.
it's very different from that perspective, and something that I certainly had to get used to. And we all rely on metrics like time to fill and time to start and things like that. So you have to look at it quite differently in the different locations that you're hiring in.
Okay, can you talk a little bit more about that? About that, that kinda 6-month, having to give notice and all of that? Because I actually did not know
Mhm.
that. What is the reasoning behind that? And I ask specifically because I know in the States, there are a lot of people when you give notice, sometimes they're like, "Nope, you're out.
Right,
I don't even want your 2 weeks
right.
or your month," you know?
That's
So
right.
what is the difference there kinda culturally with work?
Well, I think that evolved over time in terms of the companies trying to protect itself. And when you get a job offer, at least in the United Kingdom, you'll along with your offer letter, it'll tell you your notice period. And so it can vary. Even within
Mm,
our own company, it can vary. So it might be 3 months, it might be 6 months. I think those are kind of standard. But it's part of the offer process, and they think it protects them in terms of you're not going to walk out the door and they're going to be without somebody kind of handling that work. You know Maternity leaves are longer over there as well, so
right.
it's just something that's been in the workplace for quite a while, and it's what people are used to.
Yeah.
So it's pretty standard.
That's so interesting. Well, that's good for people to know, especially those who are interested in moving abroad from the US, to understand that because that's definitely very different than here. All right, I wanna go in and talk about some of the nitty gritty with hiring. I think these are topics that job seekers and potential job seekers are always looking to understand a little bit better, and it can vary across different types of industries and companies. So let's talk about the ATS, the applicant tracking system.
Mhm.
What is that at your company? What does it look like? And maybe what are some of the nuances
Sure.
for you?
So our ATS is part of our broader HR system. So I know sometimes people use different systems for their core HR and a different system for their ATS or their applicant tracking, and ours is all within the same. We use Workday, and there's a lot of benefits to that because you've kind of got the full life cycle in one system, and it is set up to be mobile friendly, which is, I think, critical in today's
Mhm.
age. And it certainly has the ability to match skills and match keywords on resumes and things like that. And the most important thing is making sure when you do your job requisitions or your job descriptions that you're really clear on what you're looking for, because the more detail you have there, the easier it is to have the system help you and make those matches when you're looking for people. You were talking about things are different in the world today around recruiting, and one of them is just that there's a lot of volume when you open a job and you post a job. And so the easier you can make it on the recruiter to filter through and get to the most qualified matches, then it's just going to make everyone's life easier.
Yeah. So I want to clarify because I know this is something that I see posted a lot. And one of the things I'm trying to do is really dispel things that are wrong out there about ATS. So you talked about keywords and the system being able to search that. So recruiter puts the job description in, they have specific keywords that they are looking for in the resumes that are uploaded,
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
Okay. It's not AI though.
Our ATS is not AI driven. It does not
Okay.
automatically decline people. It does not automatically um, generate matches for us. Now, we have AI tools that we use, and I can talk about that, that are outside and separate from our ATS.
Okay. Okay. I would love for you to talk about that because I think that there's this idea that, programs like Workday, which is one of the larger ones, are utilizing AI to basically auto reject people. And what I'm understanding is it's more questions that you guys put into the application
Mhm.
process that might
That's right.
filter somebody out. Or if they're not finding those matching keywords or titles or something really specific, then that's going to pull somebody out of the running as well.
That's right. And that's why one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give a job seeker is make sure if you're looking at a specific job, you're at least the minimum things they have listed should be on your resume.
Okay. And then I'll add to that too. Don't just verbatim copy the job description
That's right.
onto your resume. You want to take that language and adapt it to your experience and what you have done. So it still needs to be authentic to you,
Yes.
but definitely pull the 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 skill language that you
Right.
guys are using on the job description.
Agreed. And you should also be able to outline key successes and outcomes that you have along with that. So it's not
Yeah.
just to your point, a copy and paste.
Great, great. Okay, go a little bit more into how you do use AI and what that looks like.
Sure. So we've been exploring different things within the HR space and quite frankly across our company as it relates to AI. I'm sure everyone is. And we have implemented a tool pretty recently that helps with sourcing and it helps find people out in the internet that might be more passive, not just looking at LinkedIn or just looking at people that are actively out there trying to find roles and really can kind of comb the universe for things that you're looking for and find people in very unique places and ways outside of the traditional. So that's been really interesting. It's pretty new. And so we're finding that the recruiters really like it, but we still have to kind of see how the results play out. It also lets us track talent pools and it almost can be used like a CRM, like a management
Oh,
tool, like
okay.
salespeople might use, so that
Right.
if you've got a bunch of people you want to keep in touch with, but there isn't maybe a role right now,
Mhm.
it helps with that perspective, and we really didn't have that ability before, so it helps that as well.
Oh, that's amazing. So is it looking at like social media across the
Yeah,
board and articles and anywhere that somebody is mentioned?
that's right.
Oh, okay, so job seekers, we gotta hear that because I think there's 2 sides to this coin, right? There's the, are you posting content in your field, maybe as a thought leader or just somebody working in the field and putting that out there. We talk about that a lot with LinkedIn, but also be careful about what you're posting and make sure it's not negative, it's not coming across negatively. I know that's something that over the last few years we've seen a lot of social media content of
Mhm.
people really trashing their field, their company. It's not great. And this type of tool tells me that those things can be looked at positively or negatively. So people really need to be aware of what they're posting online.
I think that's generally just really good advice anyway, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. We just talked a little bit about resumes, but I want to dive a little bit deeper. What are some of your top resume tips for job seekers?
Sure. So I would say I mentioned this one, but making sure you highlight successes and outcomes, the more that you can share, with metrics and numbers, that really
Mhm.
stands out to people. And if there are, as I mentioned, certain minimum skills or experiences in a job you're applying for, you want to make sure, to your point, they're authentically captured in the resume. And then if you do have gaps in employment, it's generally fine, especially if you took a break to be home with the family or something like that. But don't try to hide it. Make sure you note it. You don't have to overly explain it because it can be talked about in an interview, but make sure it's clear. Because sometimes if it's just something's missing, people will wonder, what that gap is about.
Yeah, I love that advice. This has been such a controversial topic amongst job seekers and recruiters and career coaches
Yeah.
around what to do. And I think even in this instance, I honestly think it depends on the hiring manager as well. Cause I've talked to recruiters where they have hiring managers that are like, nope, this person has a gap.
Mhm.
We have to cut them out. And it's like, if they have a gap after 2020, we can't, what are we doing? We
Well,
gotta let that go. Like, the market's been so
that's
crazy,
right. The
you know?
market's been crazy. I think that stigma it's sort of like helping educate managers, I think, because I'll still get the
Yes.
comments sometimes about job hopping, right? Or they haven't,
Right.
people don't stay at companies as long as they used to either. So I think helping educate around some of that is our job as recruiters to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, I love that. Well, and the job hopping piece too, I think people are job hopping because 'cause they're not getting what they need.
Mhm.
And so for managers, I know we're trying to, stay on the recruiting side, but I think too, managers need to understand you have to develop your people. I think that younger generation, especially, they want to work, they want to succeed, they want to do things. So if they're bored, if they're not being challenged, if there's nothing for them, then they're gonna leave. They don't have that, I think millennials, Gen X, and boomers had this like, "Oh, I gotta stay. I have to stay for
Mm.
a certain amount of time." They had a little bit more loyalty.
Yeah,
That's out the window now. It's gonna be whoever's gonna offer me the best, position, the best pay, and the best experience as well.
that's right. Employee experience is huge. You're right. And culture. And then development opportunities that, there's a lot of data out there that says that's the number one reason people will leave.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and then I wanna reiterate with the gap, I got off a little bit, but with the gap, I love that you're talking about actually putting it on there. LinkedIn has a feature now where you can actually put a gap if were staying at home or taking care of somebody or
Yeah.
something like that. So you're an advocate for that and you
Mhm.
want people to actually put that in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when they do that, do you want them to just have it listed as just the time period, or do you want them to actually say some of what they did? I know especially stay-at-home parents or caregivers, there's a lot of skills that
Yeah.
come out in that time. Is it appropriate, do you think, for them to put like a couple bullet points under there around that?
Yeah, I think that's great. Like you said, just a couple of bullet points is perfect.
Okay,
Not too
awesome.
many.
Okay, you heard it here. That's how we deal with the gap, everybody.
According to me.
Yes. Okay, now let's go into interviewing because I know, again, this has also been a topic once people are actually getting into interviews, which I know is a huge win these days.
Mhm.
What are some of the tips that you have for people in that process?
Well, the most important thing is to be prepared, do your research. You want to make sure that it's very clear you've learned a lot about the company and make sure that you're prepared with examples. Again, I keep going back to what successes have you had? Make sure you have those examples. We leverage behavioral interviews. I don't know how common that is, but it's a style of interviewing where you want examples and you ask for
Right.
specific examples. So I would always research that and practice that because that way you'll be ready with the answers. And then you want to make sure you always have good questions to ask everyone that you interview with. Even if you've already talked to 12 people, that 13th person still have a question. And I think some good ones include like, why do you work here? What drove you
Mhm.
to work here? And what keeps you here? Because then you'll learn a lot about the culture.
Yeah.
and what people
Love
like
that.
about it. Ask what would make someone successful in the role so that you can make sure your answers to their questions tie back to that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm gonna make a little shameless plug. I have a couple podcast episodes around behavioral
Okay,
interviewing. I will link those into the blog post for this
great.
episode, just so that if you want to go a little bit deeper with that, it talks about the STAR method and just what behavioral interviewing is and all of that. But I love that. I think a lot of times people go into an interview thinking that they are prepared and they don't have enough stories or they just don't have enough to be able to share well. And so I always encourage people to have a couple stories that can can be used across a few different types of questions. So then you're not always giving, background and context and you've laid some foundation for certain experiences and being able to pull out nuance within that I think is so helpful and then less you have to remember as well.
Exactly. Absolutely. And you can use the same example or the same scenario with different people.
Right.
That's okay too.
Yeah, I love that. Julia here. Are you feeling stuck in your career, unsure of how to break through to the next level? I'm excited to share a transformative opportunity. The Career Advancement Intensive. It's a focused 1 day experience designed specifically for ambitious professionals ready to define their career path. In this immersive session, you'll work one on one with me to help you gain fresh insights into your professional strengths and uncover opportunities for growth. Together, you'll clarify your goals, refine your personal brand, and develop a strategic roadmap tailored to your unique aspirations. Imagine leaving the day with renewed confidence, a clear vision of your next steps, and practical actions you can implement immediately. As a bonus, you'll receive additional resources, tools to enhance your resume, optimize your online presence, and deepen your understanding of what drives you professionally. Not all coaching requires a 6-month commitment. The Career Advancement Intensive is perfect for ambitious professionals who want answers and strategies quickly. Before committing, let's make sure that this program is the best option for you in my complimentary career coaching clarity call. The link will be in the show notes and description for this episode. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, let's talk about cover letters. This
Okay.
is something that I feel is so different just depending on the industry and the function and the person. How do we feel about cover letters? Do we care about them anymore?
I don't, and I asked my team too because I feel like I was worried I might be an outlier on that, and they said they really don't either. I know I've noticed sometimes people will ask for one, so of course if they ask for one, you should do one. But the amount of volume that's coming in now, it's so much, and they really need to focus on that resume and the experience. So the cover letter is certainly secondary to that.
Yeah.
And if you've
Okay.
applied, that to me shows that you're interested. I don't necessarily need to read a paragraph about why.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents on cover letters. I think they're kind of a waste of time and don't think they do much for the process.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that's so good to hear. That so far that's been the theme. So we'll see if it lasts through the entire season.
That's right.
But I think that's so good to hear, and I think it helps take some pressure off people to if there is a cover letter option, you don't have to submit it. I
That's
mean,
right.
you can if you want to, but at least on that front line, it might not matter because really the recruiters are going to be looking at the resume anyway.
That's right.
Okay, I have another resume question
Okay.
that I want to actually have 2 that I wanna go back to. Do you care about length of resume?
Not really, although, I tend to think if you're going beyond 2 pages, maybe it's a bit much. Two is
Right,
certainly fine.
right.
You don't have to stick to one. But at the end of the day, if it's three, that's not gonna to me, it's not gonna knock someone out.
Okay, okay. That's good to know because I know that again is another controversial controversial opinion. I feel like most people, especially in their mid-career, 2 pages feels really appropriate to be able to talk about all the different aspects of things that you have done. It's hard to get that onto 1 page.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, my daughter's in college and working on hers. Hers is 1 page, and
1
that's
page.
fine.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, and then this is a little nuanced. So back in my university days when I was doing career coaching and I worked with international students, a lot would come in with a resume with a photo on it. Is that still something that is done outside of the US, or have we gotten away from that? Have you seen that at all?
I don't really see them anymore anywhere.
Okay.
I think that's pretty much, at least in the insurance industry, we really don't see it. I think it's not something people expect, and it's, not really something that um, should even factor in. So I think they
Okay.
shouldn't really have to,
Right.
in my
Right.
opinion.
Okay, good to know, good to know, because I know that was something back then that I was like, "This feels like we're open to a lot of discrimination, and maybe we shouldn't do
That's right. Now
this,"
that
but it
said, your
was
LinkedIn profile usually has a photo, so
that's true. Yeah, that's true, that's true. So, I would love to kinda look pre-2020, post-2020, and I know you have been in the field for quite a while, and I would love to get your perspective on how you have seen recruiting and hiring change over the years, and kinda specifically that I feel like 2020 was such a change
Mhm.
in the industry and how things were happening. Can you give kinda your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at that time period, like 20 or not, right before 2020 and then through now, you've seen different hiring cycles. You've seen, the shift from it's impossible to find people to, the pendulum swinging. And so it's been a whirlwind for sure. And I think obviously technology is becoming more and more of a factor. AI tools becoming more and more of a factor. When we had to basically all go work remote in 2020, everyone had to go work from home. We had to figure out, how to continue to interview and hire people virtually. I think video interviewing has become much more common, especially if, you might not have someone travel unless it's like a final round if they're not local, right? But so you can save a lot of money from that perspective. And it's given us a lot more options in terms of how we interview. And then I think there's even now you've got to be a little bit wary of fraud, even with people applying and AI applying. And so, at the very least, do video. You want to make sure you're seeing that person. We've seen everything from, I want to only work remote to the hybrid options. I'll just say, Markel, when we went 100% remote, we were really careful about bringing people back to the office, but we wanted people to come back probably a little earlier than other companies, and we made a lot of safety protocols around that. But we are a people first culture, and that was always at the center of what we were thinking about. And we thought, we want to protect people, but we really think people work better when they are together, at least some of the time. So we started in 2021 with a pilot around hybrid and kind of eased people back into it. So I think some people went from 100% remote for 3 years to get back in the office, right? And that was
Right.
a shock to a lot of people. And we were more of an evolution. And I think that was really well received. Um, and we did open up some remote hiring, especially in the war on talent that we saw in
Right.
2021. And for certain roles, it certainly makes sense, and we're careful about it, but we do have more of that than we used to, and it's allowed us to open up our talent pools a little bit more, which is nice. And now you're seeing a bit of a shift again, where people are saying, "Come back to the office," and in some cases, 5 days a week. And we've been
Right.
consistent, and in the U.S., we do 3 days in the office. And that's helped us because we're finding people wanting to come work here that don't want to do the 5 days and are
Right.
hoping that they can stay hybrid. And I have a really recent example. I was interviewing someone just a little while ago that's interviewing for a role here on our HR team, and she left her current job because she's been remote for 3 years for a company in Northern Virginia, which is about 2 hours from here. With traffic, it can
Mm.
be three. And they want her to come in 2 days a week now. And she just, that just doesn't work for her and her family. So
Right.
she's hoping to stay local and do something more hybrid.
Yeah, yeah. And this is such a common story that I'm hearing, and I think when we talk about the differences from recruiting 10, 15 years ago to now, I think it's this nuance of, okay, is this position hybrid? Is it in the office? Is it a remote position? Do we how wide of a pool do we want for this? What are we looking for? And I think back even not even 10 years ago. Well, we're getting there. Probably like 7 or 8 years ago. That wasn't even a conversation.
Right.
It was, "Here's the job, you're in the office, you're doing the thing," or companies that were already remote were remote,
That's right.
and doing it, and it was fine, but it wasn't as big as it is
Wasn't
now.
common.
And so I think that's some of the hard part for job seekers too, in terms of navigating, like, if you've been with a company since pre-2020, and you haven't had to deal with this, it's like, "Oh, how do I know which remote thing, and is it remote in the state? Is it remote anywhere? Is it," and like, "What does hybrid mean, and do I choose that? Do they
Yeah.
choose
Or are they
that?"
gonna change it, right? Like, "Oh, it's remote now,"
Right.
but are they gonna say, "Nope, sorry, you have to be in the office now, and you don't live near one," right? So that
Yeah.
some companies are changing their position on that.
Yeah, and okay, this is just leading us perfectly into what I am calling our kind of hot topic for this episode. I really wanted to bring in more current events that recruiters and talent acquisition professionals cared about. And this was one of them that we wanted to talk
Mm.
about, which was RTO and flex work. And it sounds like, given what you just described, you guys are really in the middle of all of it. So what do you feel like are some of the main challenges from a hiring perspective when it comes to the RTO and flex work?
I think it's, it's trying to find the right balance of, um, where people are and what they're looking for, and if people want fully remote and we don't have the role that can be fully remote, it's unfortunately not gonna work out, but I
Mm,
think we're so middle of the road and balanced, and we've got a nice approach that it seems to work for most people that we talk to. Um, but there are still, people out there that are hoping to continue to work remote or want to work remote. Um, and and that's okay too. But I
mhm,
think we have a good balance, and people seem to appreciate that. We also offer, and this was something we did when we first came back into the hybrid situation. In the United States, you can also take 2 weeks to work from anywhere in the US. And it
mm,
can't be outside of the US due to tax reasons. And we know people take advantage of it and they love it. And so, as an example, maybe you want to take your family to the beach. You take 2 weeks to go to the beach. One of those is a vacation week, and one you work from the beach, but your kids get to enjoy 2 weeks at the beach, right? So that's
yeah,
one example. Or if you have family, maybe that doesn't live close, so you can
mhm.
extend your visit time, but you might take some of that as vacation and then work from there as well. And people really do like that.
Wow. Okay, this is such a different feeling, and I want whoever is listening or watching this to understand, I think this is an example of a company that's doing it well, and for the record, I did not know any of this going in. I didn't choose to interview you because of this, but I think this is such a great example of a company that is doing it well in comparison to a lot of what we've seen in the news over the last year, and even, at the time of this recording, the last couple of months,
Yep.
where you're seeing CEOs basically say, "Nope, everybody needs to be in the office and we do not care, and you're gonna get fired, and this is gonna happen." And it's this very menacing and threatening, message that they're putting out there. And I don't think they realize yet the backlash, that people are gonna have toward that organization. And I just wonder, you being at the level that you're, I'm sure you see that. How do you feel about that, watching it all unfold from the outside?
Well, it feels so extreme. It just feels like you're really giving your employees whiplash, right? And then from an engagement perspective, I also, sort of own the engagement experience piece too under talent management. And it just feels like the opposite of what you're trying to create. It's much better to use carrots than sticks, I think. And we're doing a lot to upgrade and update our spaces where our offices are, and trying to make it so people want to be there versus
Mhm.
we're forcing them to be there. It's a very different approach.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, I know you mentioned earlier in the interview that flex work and all of that is not as big globally or outside the US. Is there something else that people in other countries are looking for? I know you mentioned, the UK, like, is there something in lieu of that that you're seeing people ask for, or is it just maybe slightly different or still flex in a different way?
Think it's flex in a different way. They're certainly flexible around the days they come in and things like that. You just don't see as much remote per se. But then, we don't have exactly the same benefits in every region because those can be
Mhm.
regional as well in terms of what people want and look for and that sort of thing. So, um, as an example, and I think this is becoming common in the US as well, but I think it felt earlier in the UK where something that was important to people was really around sort of your um, what things you offer from an employee resource group perspective or sort of those other things, those other benefits like wellness and things like that that we saw kind of pop up there first and are becoming
Yeah.
important here too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. Is there anything else with RTO or flex work that you have seen or heard that maybe isn't being talked about as widely in the news? Because I know we are kind of bombarded with all the negativity around it, but do you have any other sense of that?
I'm trying to think if there's anything additional. I feel like the pendulum has definitely swung a little bit in terms of 2020, 2021. It was all I want to be remote, and now it's more I'm happy to be hybrid and
Yeah.
come in some. So I think that's definitely shifting.
Yeah. And, we always talk about the candidate market versus
Mhm.
the employer market and all that. And we're definitely in an employer market right now. Do you see do you see any kind of timeline if from your perspective, obviously, like of when you think this could shift and go back to the employee?
That's a great question because we've watched it completely go from employees driving to more of the employer, even in the last what 2 years.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's interesting because in the industry that we're in insurance, and we're specialty insurance, so we're niche in terms of the types of things we insure. So in some cases, it's still a good market for them because if you're an underwriter who underwrites cyber, as an example, there's not a lot out there, and so they still have hot skills and can definitely be a little bit more in the driver's seat. So it kind of depends on the role too.
Yeah, yeah. And that's such a good point to job seekers in terms of what makes you stand out, what makes you different in terms of the experiences that you've had, the skills that you have, the industry, all of that, and how can you use that to leverage into something else? So I love that you brought that up because I think sometimes we go through the motions of everything and we don't really think about how unique we are and what we bring to the table and how that can be capitalized on in the
Absolutely.
process.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I would love to know what is something that you think job seekers should be doing, but they aren't doing?
Well, I don't know. This may be an obvious one, but I think a lot of people are still doing the apply and pray and hope. The more you can leverage people the more you can leverage networks, meet people, leverage people that you've known, leverage their networks. It's so much better. It's really just an easier way to make sure that you can at least get that first conversation. And that's really what you need, right? Like you even said, like
Yeah.
if you can get an interview, it's like great. So that's really your best bet. So dig out your old networks, talk to them, see who they know. It's so much easier and better than just applying for roles. So I don't know if people are doing that. I feel like it's still and I read a lot of posts on LinkedIn where it
Yeah.
seems like there's still a lot of like clicking apply, which is okay, but
Right.
it's not going to get you there as easily as leveraging people that you know.
Right. I'll tell you, this is a little tangent, but saying that made me think about you sort of mentioned it earlier. There are AI systems now that can apply for you. And I'm going to tell, I don't know if this makes me seem really old school or not, but that freaks me out as a candidate. like, to not know what is being put into the system or just hoping that it's the right thing. I don't know, maybe I'm a control freak when it comes to applications, but can you tell on your end if it's an application through something like that, or is
I'm
does it
guessing
not?
probably not. I'm guessing there are AI systems that can fill in the information just as easily as a human can, which is why it's also, as I mentioned earlier, really important to have those video interviews, do those screens. We actually recently just went through an exercise where we were talking to our recruiters about all these different steps, and we're going to share it with hiring managers too, because we just have to really be careful of, if it's a real person, but they used an AI tool to apply, and then they're gonna be the real person doing the interview, I mean, that's fine.
Yeah,
And maybe when you're earlier in your career and you're doing more of a blanket, approach, because maybe you've had one job, or, you're a little more
right,
open, but I think
right.
the further you are in your career, I would think you'd wanna be a little more targeted in what you're applying for.
Yeah, yeah, okay, I feel like this could be a whole other episode we could talk about on this, but I will leave it there. I would love to know any last thoughts or tips, anything we didn't cover that you wanna make sure you share with everybody.
I would just say, I know there's a lot of people out there that are looking and really wanting to find roles. It's easy to get discouraged. You've just really got to hang in there and ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Leverage, like I said, your networks. Sometimes resume writers can be helpful if you're struggling in that department. So don't be afraid to ask for help, and really figure out what you want, and target that type of role, or target the companies that you really like, and just be really diligent. And I think if you're patient and you stick to it, it'll work out.
Yes, I love that. Lara, thank you so much. This was
You're
such a
welcome.
great interview. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to share with our audience.
Anytime. It was great. Thank you so much.